we like to do a little doom casting around here. I don't think you need a majority, frankly.
Of course not.
I think you need a very virulent small minority, and almost definitionally, we're talking about, that type of sort of mentality. Like, it doesn't take much of like people who are sort of really invested to make a big change in this country, and particularly in this era of minoritarian rule. So give us a sense of numbers, but also talk to me about, like, my sense was that Mike Pence was, prior to Mike Johnson, the most powerful theocrat, Christian nationalist that this country has ever had in terms of like an elected official. And that he served Trump in two different ways. One, to represent the establishment and at least the sort of the business community through the Koch brothers network that he was very, very heavily invested in and invested of, I guess. But also he was the one who delivered the evangelical Christian nationalist vote. Does Trump need him anymore? Like, how is that vote being delivered? Bush needed the marriage equality amendments in 2004 to win a majority. Trump needed Pence, it seems to me, to get to at least to win the electoral vote. What's going to fill that gap this time around for Trump? And give us a sense of numbers in terms of what we're talking about.
Sure. So we have, in 2016, we have just about 80% of white evangelicals vote for Donald Trump. We have about a majority of white Catholics. So that gives you a sense of the demographic. Now, in 2020, that goes up. So more white evangelicals voted for Trump by percentage, at least, in 2020. So,
but did the raw numbers of evangelicals who voted? I mean, I imagine, particularly at that time, I'm not surprised to hear that the percentage of those who voted did, but did the raw numbers of those people grow in the same, consistent with the increase in the percentages?
Yeah, the answer is complicated, but I think this is part of what we're seeing in 2024 is a shift on the part of Trump and many leading lights in the Christian nationalist movement. Dutch Sheets, Lance Wallnau, Charlie Kirk, they are really focused on Black, Latino, and Asian Christians because they feel like they've maxed out some of that white Christian vote. Like, you can only get so much of that group. And those numbers are not necessarily growing. There's numbers out there that actually tell us that the numbers of white evangelicals in the country have gone down. What does that mean? It means there's no accident you're seeing an increase. All these news stories, all the coverage of Black voters for Trump, of an increased Latino vote for Trump, of an increased Asian American vote for Trump. That's due to a strategic targeting of those folks. And how are they doing it? Well, they're offering a Christianity based on patriarchy, based on quote unquote family values, based on gender hierarchy, based on there's only two genders and so on. So the point I think here is 2024 is a moment where you're seeing them realize if we can peel off some of those people of color and Black voters, that's where we're gonna backfill, and that's where we're gonna perhaps increase our voter reach. So I think that's answer number one. I completely agree that you only need a minority. Like if you look at the numbers from Pew or PRRI, we're talking about 30 to 40% of the country score as Christian nationalists in some way. They appear on what we would call the Christian nationalist spectrum. My colleague Paul Jupe, however, at Denison University found in a recent study that about 9 to 10% of Americans believe only Christians should be citizens. He found that 14% of Americans believe that the church should have a veto on the government's policies. The thing about the groups we're talking about today, and I think, Sam, you already know this, and the audience probably already knows this, they vote in incredibly high numbers. Right? They don't stay home. These are not folks who are going to sit it out and protest. These are not folks who are going to say, I'm just don't think I'm going to be there this time. I have to run errands. I can't make it to the polls. These are people who vote in numbers that are well beyond the average American group. And so you only need a minority once you factor in gerrymandering, once you factor in voter suppression, you really do have a recipe where 30% of the country can dictate what happens for everybody.
What's the strategy? I mean, are you aware of what the strategy is or the tactics? Because I think like the idea that they talk about, blacks for Trump, what they're really saying is specific black Christians for Trump, and Latino voters. We're playing on the conservatism there. I mean, I think, like, frankly, the biggest, we're in the midst, obviously, Harris or Biden as the candidate. I think the idea of Harris as a candidate, I think the rewards outweigh the risk, or the potential rewards, or the risks are less than they are with Biden at this point. But one of them certainly is the fact that Harris is a woman, and this is going to, that even more than the fact that she's black, it in my estimation, is going to motivate a different cohort of people than would have otherwise voted to vote against her, because the idea of having a woman as being in charge is so antithetical to that some of these sort of like that will appeal to the cohort of Christians that Trump himself could not.
It will. I mean, Kamala Harris is like made in a lab to scare the white Christian nationalists. I mean, Barack Obama
to scare the white ones, without a doubt. But they're already going to vote, it seems to me, in those numbers. I'm talking about Latino communities, and even perhaps black communities, although I would imagine like Latino communities, there would be more inspiration there. The idea of a female president.
Sure. I mean, well, I don't want to deliberate too much on Kamala Harris's presidency, her presidential candidacy that could or could not manifest. I will say she's a complicated figure in many ways, complex for a lot of folks. She represents the United States in its best form. She's a mixed race person. She's a black person. She's an Asian American person. She has a Jewish husband. I mean, this is America in 2024. For others, that's going to be used against her. It's going to be used against her even in some of those minority ethnic communities. So I think that's a reality. I think the answer, though, to your central question, Sam, is really this. How do you convince the black church, the Latino church to vote for Donald Trump, given his stance on the border, on immigration, on race in general, the Central Park Five, whatever it may be? And I think the answer is, let's look to people who we see in front of us. Byron Donalds, Herschel Walker, folks like this. The key here is to emphasize, what do you want for your country? Do you want a country built with strong men, strong families, based on a husband and a wife, men and women, no pronouns, no non-binary, whatever that means? Do you want to have groomers and perverts in your schools, or do you just want to have a candidate who will support what is the right kind of sex, the right kind of marriage, the right kind of love? Do you want that kind of country over there with the rainbow flag and the gender spectrum? Or do you want strong men leading you into an uncertain future where we are at threat in every turn? That's the sell. The sell is lean on the patriarchy, lean on the gender structure, lean on the sense of the otherness that you talked about earlier. Who is other than me? Well, the people who are lesbian, gay, non-binary, the people who are trans, they're more other than you than the folks who are telling you that Joe Biden is better for the person of color. Be more afraid of them, be more angry at them. And that works in many of these churches. It works in many of these spaces. And so that's the sell. And that's the play.
That's why they call her the DEI. That's why the Post, I think, called her the DEI Barbie. Or
they couldn't print the N word. So
but the point is that by saying the DEI Barbie instead of the N word, they can then sort of appeal to people of color and say, like, she still represents alienness. Well, even though in some areas, I mean, and that's the point, is that they've been able to sort of like convert slightly the terminology so that it can apply. It's sort of like a all-purpose racist otherization that can work, meet the sort of the bigot where they are in some way. Well, I have one also final question because this I think plays a very big part in what we're seeing with the Supreme Court is Opus Dei. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that Scalia and Alito at least are Opus Dei, that Leonard Leo, who is who has orchestrated essentially the Supreme Court via the Federalist Society for a couple of decades, also Opus Dei. I know that Kudlow, I think, is also who was Trump's chief advisor. How does Opus Dei play with this Christian nationalism? Are they just cousins essentially?
No, they're I think one of the things that I've tried to get across over the last few months is that radical traditional Catholicism, right? This very overwhelmingly conservative strain of Catholicism, of which Opus Dei is a major part in that ecosystem, is at the center of what we now understand the Christian nationalist movement in this country and everything that's happening at the Supreme Court, as well as Project 2025. So let me lay it out. The Heritage Foundation is behind Project 2025. Who starts the Heritage Foundation? Paul Weyrich. Paul Weyrich was a radical traditionalist Catholic. After Vatican II, he started going to a church that where the mass was in Greek because he couldn't stand the vernacular. He broke with his own church because he thought they were too liberal. If you look at the life of Paul Weyrich, he is a strict male supremacist. He's a Christian supremacist, and he is somebody who believes that a dominant patriarch should be the head of the house, the church, and the government. Who is now in charge of the Heritage Foundation? Kevin Roberts, also a traditional Catholic. Okay, so there's a long lineage of the Heritage Foundation having this vision of Christian supremacism. They believe Christ is king, not in religious pluralism. They believe that their Christian values should be infused throughout the government without any question. They believe that male leadership is the way to go, period. So it's no accident to me that Kevin Roberts gets out there in public the other day after the immunity ruling and says, if the left will allow it, we'll have a bloodless revolution. That's a traditional Catholic leading in the lineage of Paul Weyrich, who is articulating that they are so excited for a unified executive in the vision of Project 2025, where a male patriarch will have almost complete control of the executive branch and perhaps the entire government. It's also what we're seeing in SCOTUS. So one of the arguments I made in Politico a couple months ago is that the IVF rulings represent the Catholicization of American sexual ethics, that evangelicals in the 60s were not against abortion. Evangelicals up until recently were not against IVF. But IVF and abortion have been traditionalist Catholic issues for a long, long time. So when you see the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on IVF, or you see the Southern Baptist Convention condemn IVF, they're doing so at the influence of those traditionalist Catholics you're mentioning, the folks who are not only affiliated with Opus Dei, but who are running the Federalist Society, and in many ways are driving the conversation about gender and sex within those with those communities. So if there has ever been a moment of overwhelmingly conservative Catholic forces dominating our politics, it is now, whether you look at the Supreme Court or Project 2025. Project 2025, in its essence, is a rad trad fever dream.
So not cousins, more like grandfathers, fathers of
leaders of the household.
How do they manage to be like? I would say that 70% of what we've talked about, our audience is familiar with in some fashion or another. But I would say there's a much smaller group of people who are, Opus Dei we were talking about Opus Dei more in the aughts.
Yep.
Than we are today. I think Novak, who was a Washington Post writer and was on Crossfire, was Opus Dei. But it seems to like they got the message. And Opus Dei has always sort of been a little bit secretive, as far as I understand. But they got the message that like we need to recede, at least I mean, is that happened, and how has that happened, and how conscious of that was that?
Well, I think there's a sense there of sometimes less is more. Sometimes less name recognition is more. I mean, I think we're seeing this with Trump and Project 2025, right? You're seeing more and more Americans understand what Project 2025 is. So he comes out with this incoherent rant about how he has no idea what it is and he doesn't believe any of it. Well, if you don't know what it is, how do you know you don't believe it? He's just basically trying to do, damage control. It's the same with Open State. If we recede into the background, right, slowly, drip by drip, what we see over the course of the aughts and the Obama years is so much funding, so much network building, right? So much political influence coming into cultivation. By the time we get to the Trump years, it's the Federalist Society who picks us 3 judges, right? By the time we get to 2022, 23, 24, we have people like the Southern Baptist Convention and a Supreme Court justice in Alabama condemning IVF. I mean, that is an overwhelming victory for the likes, not only of Open State, but anyone in that traditional Catholic universe. They feel enormous victory, and I dare say enormous momentum right now. Leonard Leo's at a place where he's like, I got the court.
He's got $1 billion. People have forgotten this, but he was given $1 billion with a B dollars to basically go be an authoritarian entrepreneur. Wherever you can push this agenda, do it.
We've already got the court in his mind. That's what he's thinking. And so let's go get the state legislatures and let's go get Congress. I mean, and make Congress even worse than it is now. I mean,
well, that controversy, just to add to it, with the kicker from the Kansas City Chiefs, Harrison Butker, that he was speaking at a college where Leonard Leo has connections and has donated, as well as Josh Hawley, having connections to that too.
Leo was the commencement speaker the year before.
Yep.
Right. So here we have Harrison Butker, 28-year-old kicker, and the year before it was Leonard Leo. And so I think that, I mean, it just follows along everything you're saying, Emma.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. And
good thing the Democrats are in a great position to beat this back right now.
This is your cue, Brad, to say something like, "Oh, but here's the good story."
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I think for me, here's a couple things we could take away. Perhaps is we got news of stunning left center victories in France over the last couple of days. Yeah. Labour is in power in the UK, and the Tories are gone after 14 years. Whether we look to places like Mexico or the pushback on Modi in India, there are people across the world saying no to fascism. And I think for me, the hope lies in a message that says, look, Biden, Harris, whomever, we have a chance to say no to fascism. We have a chance to say no to totalitarianism. And there are people across the world who've already signaled that they understand the threat and they're doing the same. So, yeah, I'm not going to prognosticate, and I'm never going to take the foot off the gas of trying to reveal to people just what a dire situation we face right now, because we do. But there's always hope, and hope springs from organizing and togetherness. And if people are willing to rub shoulders with other human beings, you often feel a sense of momentum and a sense of hope grow. And so that's my encouragement. Go do one thing you don't usually do. And don't sit on the sidelines as we kind of descend into what could be a summer of despair.
Brad Anishi, writer, co-host of the Straight White American Jesus podcast, founder of Axis Mundi Media, author of Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. We will put a link to that book at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube description. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thanks, Brad.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.